Now, I remember when I was a student, I definitely didn't have $500, $700, or $1,000 to spend on a laptop. And it seems as though all the other laptop recommendation videos on YouTube have a different idea of what budget really means. So welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be looking at some actually budget laptops for students. I'll leave links to all the laptops I cover in this video down in the description below. Let's get straight into it. Now, if you're in the market for budget laptops, you may have come across Chromebooks. Now, Chromebooks are laptops, but there are some key differences. A traditional laptop is a PC which will have Microsoft Windows or Mac OS as its operating system, and in some cases Linux, but we're not going to cover that. A Chromebook doesn't have Windows or Mac OS as its operating system, it has Chrome OS. Now, if we take a Windows laptop, for example, it'll have all the applications downloaded onto it locally, Microsoft Word, Excel, games, etc. Chromebooks don't have these applications downloaded locally on the machine. They focus more on cloud and internet-based applications as their primary user interface. So instead of Microsoft Excel, you'll have Google Sheets, which is accessed via Chrome. Chromebooks are known for their impressive battery life because they can't run intensive applications, and they're generally lightweight and easy to carry around because they forego a lot of the hardware internals to keep their system size at a minimum. They're also budget friendly and they're ideal for web browsing and document editing. Now, traditional laptops, on the other hand, tend to offer much more power and versatility with more powerful processors, more RAM, and more storage in general because they have to have all the applications downloaded directly onto them. So ultimately, traditional laptops are more suited to more intensive tasks like software development or video editing. Now, traditional laptops are more expensive, but that cost comes at the addition of more flexibility. With either Windows or Mac OS, you can virtually run any application, and you also tend to get more I/O input-output ports to interact with the device. And just in general, a traditional laptop may be a device that lasts longer than a Chromebook, but for students where your use cases are mainly report writing, watching lecture recordings, uploading assignments, and document editing, Chromebooks are a great place to start. So let's take a look at some of the best laptops for students. Coming in at currently under $160, starting off at the least expensive laptop on the market, the HP Stream. I remember when these came out back in the day, and if I remember correctly, their entire USP was targeting the student market. And this laptop will get you by perfectly fine for a couple of months or even years as long as you temper your expectations. Now, this laptop being on the budget end is quite small. It's got an 11-inch display, and while usual laptops are 13 to 16 inches, you do lose out on some of that screen real estate, so you do have to bear that in mind. It has a 720p display, a dual-core Intel Celeron processor, 4GB of RAM, and 64GB of eMMC storage, so it's quite slow. It's probably slower than your phone, but it is a laptop with a keyboard and a trackpad, and very decent I/O considering the price. The one I found even has a USB-C port, and it should be fine for document editing, creation, and the smaller size means it's perfectly suited to carrying around in a backpack from lecture to lecture. The processor being quite low power means that battery life is also quite good on this machine, and you should be able to get the advertised 13 hours of screen on time with it quite easily. Another thing with a laptop like this is if something potentially untoward does happen to the laptop, then you can rest assured it was still on the budget end, and then at least it isn't the latest and greatest MacBook Pro that you spent 20 times the money on. Moving up a notch to this HP Chromebook, coming in at under $230. Now, bear in mind, this isn't a prescriptive recommendation. You can find loads of similarly spec'd Chromebooks with the same processor, similar RAM, and storage in Lenovo or Acer packaging, etc. With the HP Chromebook, you get an upgraded quad-core Intel Pentium processor, the same 4GB of RAM, and a jump to 128GB of eMMC storage. Now, we're squarely in what is unmistakably a laptop category with this machine. It has a full 1080p HD display, bigger and less cramped keyboard and trackpad, but surprisingly less I/O than our previous HP Stream. So you're paying more for less I/O, but I'd imagine that's done for design purposes, with the whole design aesthetic going for slimmer and more sleek design. You lose out on some of that I/O. Now, with this, you'll definitely get a performance boost. Doubling the amount of cores from dual core to quad core will be a welcome improvement in performance, and certain apps should undoubtedly load quicker, but being still limited to 4GB of RAM means you won't be able to multitask much more than you would with the HP Stream. Would I personally recommend this Chromebook? No, The HP Stream sits at the complete budget end of the laptop category, and this sort of sits in a middle no man's land where spending a little bit more money will get you vastly improved value for money. On to the next laptop. All right, jumping to our next laptop and our first actual traditional laptop at under $300, the HP 15S FQ5. Now, personally, I wouldn't even consider anything below this because the performance jump from the Chromebook to this machine is just enormous. With this, you get an actual 6-core Intel i3 processor with the performance jump from the previous Chromebook's Intel Pentium N6000 just absolutely astonishing. You also get a jump to 8GB of RAM and 128GB of SSD storage. The previous two Chromebooks we spoke about had eMMC storage. SSD storage is much faster in things like booting up the laptop and opening certain applications. Alongside that, you get Intel's UHD integrated graphics, so video watching and graphics intensive tasks will run much smoother. For example, connecting to an external monitor shouldn't affect performance too much. Now, with this laptop having an actual slightly more power hungry processor, you do lose out on battery life, and this machine is only rated for 7.5 hours of battery. Now, that is undoubtedly a drawback of powerful chips in budget machines. Manufacturers would gladly sacrifice battery life in order to keep costs low, but with this being, in every sense of the word, a more traditional laptop, it immediately serves as more of an investment, a long-term investment than say one of the Chromebooks would, and it'll be much more suited to a wide array of applications over a longer period of time. Jumping up to the $400 and below category, now we did make quite a steep jump from the previous category, from $300 to $400, that's a $100 difference, but this laptop is quite a good increase in performance, storage, and features. The Asus Vivobook 15X OLED X1. With this, you get a deca-core, a 10-core i3 processor, 8GB of RAM again, but this time with a far more substantial 512GB of SSD storage. So you've got much more headroom in the storage department. Going back to the processor, the i3 1220p processor from Intel is a performance processor. The P stands for performance. P-series chips draw more power than their U-series chip counterparts, and they're far more efficient performers when you're dealing with higher workloads. So while the U-series chips are fine for short, bursty tasks, the P-series chips are much better at sustained performance over a longer period of time. And at this price range, you get quite a welcome inclusion, an OLED display. Now, it's dependent on the quality of the panel that Asus have used, but with an OLED display, you get better contrast ratios and faster, quicker response times, which makes an OLED panel ideal for situations where image quality is paramount. If you're a photo or video editor, this panel should offer you much more true-to-life images than an LED panel would. Now, is a fancy OLED screen panel the main reason to splurge on this as a student? Probably not. Aside from the display, the main reasons to upgrade to this machine are the improved performance, battery life, which is impressively rated at 10 hours, even with a more power-hungry processor, and the extra storage. The M1 MacBook Air. Now, I personally don't think there's a laptop easier to recommend than the M1 MacBook Air. Even though this came out back in 2020, for most people, especially students, it'll do everything you need it to and more. And you can find examples of the base M1 MacBook Air at just a shade over $500. Apple's transition to Apple Silicon marked huge improvements over the previous generation Intel versions, and the performance power you have at hand with the M1 chip is really good. Another benefit of Apple being able to create the M1 chip, the Apple Silicon infrastructure from the ground up, means that battery life on the Air is absolutely astonishing, rated for up to 20 hours. MacBooks have long had some of the best battery life specifications on the market when it comes to their laptops, and the transition to Apple Silicon only helped. I've had the chance to try out a baseline spec M1 MacBook Air, and over the day and a half that I used it, I didn't even have to plug it in once, and at the end of that day and a half, I was left with 23% of remaining battery. That's seriously impressive. As a student going from lecture to lecture, that battery life is a huge plus point. The last thing you want is to have to constantly worry about plugging your laptop in. Drawbacks. Now, there are always drawbacks when you put the words Apple and budget together. The base spec M1 MacBook Air only comes with 8GB of RAM, which at this price point is maybe okay. You can definitely get away with it as a student, but it could be the case where RAM becomes the bottleneck and you won't be able to use the entire power of the M1 chip because you don't have enough RAM. Another issue with the baseline spec, you're only limited to 256GB of storage, which at this price point where you can easily push 512 gigabytes from other machines is definitely a drawback, but again, as a student, you could possibly get away with it. Now, Apple needed a way to differentiate between the M1 MacBook Air and the M1 MacBook Pro. So the M1 Air features a fanless design, which means the Air is great for short, bursty workloads, but there are reports where it throttles hugely under sustained load because the heatsink can't dissipate heat quick enough away from the processor as it heats up. I/O, input and output ports, are also at a bare minimum. You'll need an adapter for almost anything if you want to connect any peripherals to the M1 Air. Now, are these drawbacks or deal breakers? I would say they are more on the side of drawbacks, because as a student, the M1 Air not only serves as a usable device, but quite a significant investment over the long term. You'll probably end up using it for a couple of years and you won't notice any performance decrease with the amount of power the M1 chip has. If you end up using the laptop for 5 years, which is entirely possible, 3 years of undergrad and 2 years after that, then a $500 device cost you $100 per year, or just a shade over $8 per month. Please don't use that price breakdown to justify a purchase. It was only used to demonstrate the monthly cost of an upfront investment. Now, if I was going back to university this year, as a student, if my budget was very limited, me personally, I wouldn't bother with a laptop. I would just purchase an M1 Mac Mini, which you can now find used for under $350, and connect it to a $100 monitor and keep it at home. For lectures, I would stick with a notebook, and then if need be, I can scan those notes and upload them into OneNote later on. The M1 Mac Mini has a fan, so it can offer far better performance than the laptop chip, so it leaves me with a higher power ceiling for things like video editing, photo editing, video rendering, and things like that, which are tasks that a laptop in the same price range just wouldn't be able to handle. But my reasoning is very specific to my use cases, and laptops in general are much more applicable to general student workflows. That being said, my point being, the used or refurbished market is a great way for students to get more bang for your buck. Just make sure you do your research and make sure there's at least some sort of warranty attached to any refurbished product. A couple of things to avoid when you're purchasing your first laptop. Number one, it may very well be very tempting to purchase a fancy touchscreen 360-degree hinge laptop that you can turn from tablet mode to laptop mode. My advice would be don't bother with any of those features. Trust me, from someone who did make that same mistake, an always-on screen eats up so much battery life that it just isn't worth the extra functionality. You tell yourself, oh, I'll use it for multimedia, I can turn it into tablet mode, I can watch movies on it, and I can take notes on OneNote with a pen. Okay, maybe I did take quite a few notes in OneNote, but for the vast majority of students, you don't need a touchscreen. In most cases, it doesn't make sense, and a laptop form factor transforming into a tablet form factor doesn't really mesh well together. It's really clunky and inefficient. Number two, don't buy a gaming laptop. Gaming laptops only deliver peak performance when they're plugged in. As soon as you unplug them, performance drops drastically, and along with it, battery life. Believe it or not, some gaming laptops only have battery lives rated for up to 4 hours. 4 hours. They need to be plugged in all the time because they have such power-hungry processors and mobile graphics cards. 4 to 6 hours of battery life is absurdly low, and it's not suitable for students. Gaming laptops are also often quite huge and chunky, so lugging them around from lecture to lecture on campus really isn't the most practical idea. Now, as a student, laptops might make your life potentially easier, but they're not a die-hard necessity. Believe it or not, I did most of my degree, mathematics, finance, actuarial science, in large part on a notepad. However, if you do choose to go the route of not buying a laptop as a student, you will need a laptop, or you will need a PC or a machine at home to upload assignments, watch back lecture recordings and things like that. And circling back to our first point, if your degree doesn't require multiple applications, intensive applications, if you'll just be writing essays, editing documents, and watching back the odd lecture recording, then Chromebooks are a great place to start and save yourself some cash. Well, there you have it, budget laptops for students, starting off with the cheapest laptop I could find. That's all for this video. I hope it was useful. If it was, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. If you like this style of video, check out my 5-year review of the iPhone 11 Pro Max. I'll link it up there. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.